Well, critical race theory is getting all the press. Critical race theory is an educational tool that has been invented, as it were, to try to make up for the inequities that have taken place historically with slavery and segregation. And my, oh my, oh my, that is not simple. That is not simple at all. I'm sympathetic on one level because I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. Didn't grow up there, but I was in high school in Birmingham, Alabama, president student body of an all-white high school. I know what segregation is all about. I saw the separate drinking fountains. I've seen blacks on the back of the bus that I was riding in. I've seen restaurants that they could not enter. I can't even imagine what it's like to grow up in a culture where you are black and all these things are a daily presence in your life. I know there's been police abuse. I have been a district attorney, a prosecuting attorney, and seen inequities in the criminal justice system. I know some of the macro issues that happen in the inner city with blacks, black on black killings, gang killings, the tragedy that black on black killings, even while I am speaking, whenever you are hearing this, some young black man is dying or his kid sister is dying because the bullet went astray. It's just an all horrible fact of life in inner cities in America and elsewhere around the world. So the racial problem is a giant, huge, giant problem. But the answer to that is not in saying to those who are white that they individually and collectively are responsible for all the evils that have happened in the past. Somebody is not reading Ezekiel chapter 18. Ezekiel chapter 18 isn't talking about race issues as such, but it certainly is when it comes to accountability and responsibility for other generations. In a hypothetical worthy of a law school classroom, Ezekiel asks the question about one generation, the father, who is not a good guy at all. But the second generation, his son, sees all the things his father did, and despite that, he is a good guy. He does what is right. But the third generation, his son, is like the grandfather and is not doing what ought to be done. He is not a righteous person. So you have generations in which each generation chooses whether they will be a righteous person or an evil person. Hence, that line that comes from that chapter, the soul who sins is the one who will die. Meaning that the father is not accountable for the sins of the son is not accountable for the sins of the father. No generation of whites today is collectively or individually responsible for slavery. It's an evil that we should all be ashamed of and embarrassed by. It's something that needs to be overcome. But that doesn't mean, as critical race theory teaches, that all whites are therefore collectively guilty of that historical sin. The next thing that hits me is that critical race theory sees everything through the lens of race. Everything is seen through the lens of race. And that simply cannot be the case. If you were to do that, the world would make absolutely no sense whatsoever. And it is a way of projecting a kind of victim attitude. A victim attitude. We are all victims. And you know what? There are other races who thrive academically, economically, and otherwise, who thrive despite the fact that they are not of the white race. They are not victims. But blacks are unable to see themselves as anything but victims. And now I'm talking broadly here because not all blacks even agree with critical race theory. But for those who are pushing the radical agenda, they can't get over the victim complex. And I have seen in my own extended family, a dysfunctional family, because a divorce took place, resulting in the next generation where divorces have taken place, resulting in the next generation where divorces inevitably will take place. There is this victim complex on those who are the receiving end of divorce. And I haven't been there. I don't know what it's like, but I can imagine it's horrible. But if you continue to generate the idea of we are victims, and the people who have victimized us, they're abusers, there is no end to it. And Scripture talks about the fact that the consequences of sin, all sin, any sin, slavery or whatever it might be, can go on to the third and fourth generation. And I see it in my own extended family. So I see it culturally as being something that critical race theory is kind of like the perpetuation of this victimhood and lashing out at whatever the closest representation of abuse is. It's not going to solve anything. It divides us. It doesn't bring any unity to us any more than in my family, who cannot find harmony among themselves. This is not going to help this nation to have critical race theory doing that kind of divisiveness. You know what's going to help the most in the inner city with black-on-black killings, et cetera, et cetera? Getting back to God and God's ways, to where there are intact families, to where there are not children being born out of wedlock, to where there are not children that are being aborted before they're born out of wedlock. And that sounds like a harsh, judgmental, moral issue, but that is what is happening in the inner city. And in truth, this also probably came largely as a result of what happened in slavery, when the family unit was torn apart, fathers and mothers sold off to different slave owners, absentee fathers because they're somewhere else, mothers having to step up and take the role that the man was intended to play, not according to God's will. Women should not have to be raising children without men in the home. And that too has been perpetuated. Not only fathers not being in the home, but mothers taking a spiritual leadership role that they were never burdened with the responsibility of having. It gets so complicated, but it's a spiritual issue. It's not a political issue. It's not a racial issue. It's something that critical race theory is not only not going to solve, but it is actually tearing us apart in ways that are harmful to racial relations, and it should be resisted at all cost.